We're now on Daf Zayin Amid Beis, and at the end of the pasuk in Yechezkel, it says v'inisich lo anech od. And the Gemara darshes again with regard to tzedakah. V'inisich Amar Amzutra afilu ani amisparis min tzedakah. So inisich means someone who's afflicted, and he's an ani ayin nun yud. Yaset tzedakah, nevertheless he should give tzedakah. And then we go back to the beginning of the pasuk. Bechena goes with the over; it'll be saved from the din of Gehenna. The Rambam in Hilchas Matnas Anim Perek Zayin paskins based on a Gemara that even an ani is chayav in tzedakah, but the Rambam adds that he's not chayav more than shlishis hashekel b'shana, an annual charity of 1/3 of a shekel. And that's derived in Bava Basra Daf Tes from a pasuk in Nehemiah. However, although the Shulchan Aruch in Yoredeis Siman Reish Mem Ches copies the Rambam and rules that afilu oni amisparis doesn't chayav losei tzedakah, the Ramah in Yoredeis Siman Reish Nun Aleph brings in the name of the tour Parnosas atzmo kodemes l'chol adam. V'eno chayav losei tzedakah ad shielo parnosa. In other words, only when he has an increment more than what he needs for his basic living expenses, which probably includes shelter, clothing, food, only then is he chayav in tzedakah. Now that seems to contradict this halacha that even an ani is chayav in tzedakah. And the one who takes on this question is the Aruch HaShulchan in Siman Reish Mem Ches. And he writes the following. Our sugya is talking about giving a shlishis hashekel annually. And that is an absolute minimum requirement, an obligation imposed upon every single person, in even an ani amisparnis min tzedakah. And that was the Rambam in the Shulchan. The Torah, on the other hand, quoted by the Ramah, is talking about giving meiser, or giving a chomesh from his parnasa. And an ani amisparnis min tzedakah is not chayav to give masa. Lo ha'encha od Tani Rav Yosef shuv ein marin lo simoni aniyus. Now he'll be zochet hashirus because he gives tzedakah. And now we go back to our Mishnah, and we're going to be focusing our attention on the northern border of Eretz Yisrael. Yehuda Omer in the Mishnah, me rekem la mizrach me akol litzafon ve'akom titzafon. Lememro, do we see from Rabbi Yehuda and Mishnah the akol litzvona de Eretz Yisrael kind, that Akko is situated on the northern border of Eretz Yisrael. Otherwise, why does the Mishnah say me akol litzafon if there are other cities to the north? And now the Gemara is going to quote a Tosefta in the 18th chapter of Olos. And in the Tosefta, we're talking about going north from from Akko to Kiziv, meaning that Kiziv in the Tosefta is north of Akko. And the Tosefta is interested in what's called Tumas Eretz Amamin, which means the Chacham made a gzera, and we'll see this later on in Daf Ches on Chutz Laretz, that if somebody goes into Chutz Laretz, then B'Rabbanan becomes Tomei B'Tumas Mes. So where is Chutz Laretz? And it seems from the Tosefta that the northern border, which takes you over the end of Eretz Yisrael, the north, to Chutz Laretz is Kziv, not Akko. This is also Nagea to a tour of Chumas and Maisers. Raminu, the Gemara says, Stira, it says in the Tosefta, Hoya Mahalach me Akko l'Kziv. He's traveling north from Akko to Kziv. And if he has to know whether he is in Eretz Yisrael or he's in Chutz Laretz, then Miyamino, meaning Akko and Ksiv are all the way on the east. So on his right side, Litzad Mizrach Haderech, Tmea Mishum Eretz Amin B'Ptur Min HaMaser Min HaShvius. That's already Chutz Laretz, and therefore he's Tomei if he goes to the right, meaning to the east, of this derech, then he's Tomei Tumas Aviras Chutzlaretz. On the other hand, he's Potem in a Maaseh Shvius Gittin Chutzlaretz. Until somebody who's a baki will tell him, hey, you know what? The derech goes a little bit around. That's called misakemes, and it moves towards the west, and it enters into Eretz Yisrael. And only then does he know that he's not Tomei Tumas Eretz Amamim. Mismol, and the area to his left, which means Litzad Marav of the derech, is Tahora Mishum Eretz Amamim. He doesn't have Tumas Avira Eretz Amamim. V'chayeves Memasu Shvius, because it's Eretz Yisrael. Shivadol Chashi Ptura, until some expert will tell him that he went off on a derech hamisakemes towards the east, towards Eretz Yisrael, and therefore to the left of his derech it's chutzlaretz. Ad Hechan, and how far north does he go until he finally reaches the point where he's in chutzlaretz? Ad Kziv. So we see that on the eastern border of Eretz Yisrael, you have Akko, and above in the north, you step over the boundary to chutzlaretz at Kziv. So Akko is not the most northern part of Eretz Yisrael. Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Yossi, Mishum Ad Lavlavo, or that's another place. Abaye answers, Ritzua Nafka, Akko is on the north of Eretz Yisrael. It's on the northern border. That's why our Mishnah says that Me'akko Litzafon is chutzlaretz. But when you go from Akko north, there's a Ritzua, a section that protrudes in the land, and if you go north to the end of that Ritzua, you'll find yourself in a city called Kziv. So the derech that leads you from Akko to Kziv is on the eastern side of Eretz Yisrael, and there's a Ritzua going up north. And regarding that Ritzua, the Tosefta says that the land on the right side is Chutzlaretz, meaning to the east. The land on your left of this Ritzua is Eretz Yisrael, and that's on the Marav side, and the Ritzua itself is Eretz Yisrael. The Maharsha writes that according to Tosfos Shita back on Daf Beis, Akko was half in Eretz Yisrael and half in Chutzlaretz. So therefore, if you want to get a picture of what it was like according to Tosfos, then what you'll see is that on the northern border of Eretz Yisrael, to the right side is Akko of Chutzlaretz. To the left side, meaning on the Marav side, is Akko, that half of Akko that's in Eretz Yisrael. The Ritzua goes up from the left Akko all the way up to Kziv. So Gemara now asks the Kash v'yoyev Tanasi Monahachi. It's very unusual, the Gemara argues, that when the Mishnah would want to give some sort of a siman so that we identify Eretz Yisrael, that it would give it with a Ritzua. And the Gemara says, that's exactly what the Torah does in Shoftim, in Parsha Shoftim. Ranami Yov Simona, the pasuk gives a siman through what's called a mesila, and a mesila is another way of saying a ritzua. T'chsiv, at the end of the story, I'm sorry, I said Parsha Shoftim. What I meant is Sefer Shoftim. Correction. At the end of the story of Pilegesh Begiva, what happened was that there were 200 members of Binyamin, of Shevet Binyamin, that were not able to get married. And the reason for that is because Bnei Yisrael took a shvuah, an oath, they're not going to give their daughters for marriage to a man from Shevet Binyamin. So the Eitzah was given to these 200 members of Binyamin that they should go to the city of Shiloh, and there'll be a day in which, and it's always on that day annually, in which the women folk go out and dance and then find yourself a wife. And the pasuk says, "Vayomru hine chag Hashem b'Shilo miyom yamima." So this was a day in which, in the Mishkan of Shiloh, they would bring karbanos, and there was a celebration. Asher, and where is Shiloh located? It's mitzvona leBeisel. It's north of Beisel. And then it says in the pasuk, Mizrach Hashemesh leMesila ha'olam miBeisel Shchema minegev lilfona. So Mizrach Hashemesh would mean the eastern part of Eretz Yisrael. And the pasuk is telling you that Shiloh is on the eastern part of Eretz Yisrael. And V'yomer Rav Papa, Mizracha shel Mesila, if you want to know where Mizrach HaShemesh is, and what's the implication of the pasuk, Shiloh is on the eastern side of a Mesila. And that means that the city of Beisel is on the southern side, and then Livona is on the northern side. Shiloh is in effect equidistant between two cities. There's the northern city of Beisel. Shiloh is to the north of the southern city of Beisel and to the south of the northern city of Livona. And the pasuk gives you a siman so that you know exactly where to find Shiloh, and that's with the Mesila. The Mesila is the derech that takes you from Beisel north to Shechem, and Shiloh is on the eastern side of that derech. So we see already a precedent from the pasuk that the pasuk uses a Mesila as a siman. So therefore, don't worry and question the Tana who speaks about the Ritzua, and he gives that as a siman. Where is Eretz Yisrael? Tana Chada, the Gemara now wants to know what's the din of a get that was written on a boat, and the boat is traveling on a river within Eretz Yisrael. Maybe get B'Sfina is, according to one brisa, can maybe Eretz Yisrael. The Sfina has the same din as the dry land of Eretz Yisrael, and there's no need for Mefaninech to Mefaninech. Tanya Idach, another brisa, says just the opposite, that the din, the status of a Sfina, and a get that was brought from a Sfina, was written on the Sfina, can maybe be Chutz La'aretz, which means that the Naharos, the rivers of Eretz Yisrael, do not have the same din as the dry land below, but rather have the status of Chutz La'aretz as far as the dinim that apply to Chutz La'aretz, or to Eretz Yisrael. Rav Yirmiyah lo kasha. I can reconcile this contradiction between the two parts. Rav Yehuda Rabbanon. Bisnan, where do we have a machlokes between Rav Yehuda and Rabbanon? And this is a Mishnah in the second parak of Chala. Afar chutz la'aretz haba b'sfina la'aretz. What they do is they bring dirt from chutz la'aretz by boat to Eretz Yisrael. And now the boat is on one of the rivers within Eretz Yisrael. And what do they do with this offer? They use this offer to plant fruits. And now these fruits have to be determined as whether or not they're chayev in mitzvahs hatluyos ba'aretz, and the Mishnah establishes chayev b'maser b'shvius according to the Tanakh. In other words, the rivers of Eretz Yisrael have the same status as Eretz Yisrael, and therefore the boat that is traveling on top of the rivers is considered that it's mechuber l'karka, it's connected to the karka below, and therefore it's chayev in mitzvah tluyos ba'aretz, has the status of Eretz Yisrael. Rabbi Yehuda, no. Rabbi Yehuda says the spin is floating on the water, on the top of the water. It's not considered mechuber l'karka. The din of mitzvah tluyos ba'aretz is generated by the karka of Eretz Yisrael, and the top of the river where the spin is traveling is not connected to the karka. But bisman shasmina goes sheshes, if let's say the water is so shallow that the sfina is actually touching the ground, rubbing against the ground below the water, then it's considered mechuber lekarka. Aval eina sfina goshesh. According to Rabbi Yehuda, if the sfina is simply traveling on top of the water patur, because the mayim is mafsik between the sfina and the karka, so it's not considered mechuber lekarka, and if any gidulim in this boat have the status of gidulei chutz la'aretz. So the brisa that paskins that if you bring a get by boat on top of a river in Eretz Yisrael, then it has the din of Eretz Yisrael. That's the Chachamim shita, that a sfina floating on the water of Eretz Yisrael is considered mechuber lekarka. It has a din of Eretz Yisrael, not only gabi trumas and maisus, but also gabi get. The brisa that paskins that if you bring a get on a boat over the rivers of Eretz Yisrael has the din of maybe get michutzla to require for the nechta. That's Rabbi Yehuda's shita, that a sfina that's floating on top of the water is not considered mechuber lekarka. The water is mafsik between the karka and the sfina, and that's why the Chachamim gave the status of the sfina chutzlar. It's even with regard to get. Abai Omer, I have a different solution to this problem. There's no contradiction. Hava Rabbi Yehuda, both brisos are attributable to Rabbi Yehuda. V'lo kasha, kan bisman she'ena sfina gosheshes, kan bisman she'asfina gosheshes. So now the Gemara assumes at this point an analogy between the avir of Eretz Yisrael and the status of the mayim on the rivers of Eretz Yisrael. And the Tana that holds that a sfina on top of the water is not considered mechuber lekarka, that's Rabbi Yehuda, because the mayim is a chatzitza between the karka and the sfina. He's going to hold that if you find a similar, an analogous parallel case, that if you find gidulim that were grown in the avir of Eretz Yisrael, they're not considered mechuber lekarka. It means the airspace between the karka and the gidulim that are growing, and we're going to see this in the case of an otzitz, are a mafsik, a chatzitza, and therefore the gidulim in the avir of Eretz Yisrael are not chayav in Trumas and Maasros. Amar Rab Zera, otzitz naku, you have a flower pot that's perforated, and therefore it sucks up the yanika from the karka. Hamudach al gabi yisedos. In Eretz Yisrael, they placed it on top of poles that were holding it up. They planted in the otzitz, and peros grew. Bana l'machlokas Rabbi Yehuda v'Rabbana. Whether or not these peros are chayovim in Trumas and Maasros, that according to Rabbi Yehuda, the sfina on top of the water is not considered mechuber lekarka. The water is a chatzitza. The same din will apply in its otzitz that's totally the aver al gabi yisedos, that the airspace between the ground and the otzitz is a chatzitza, therefore the peros are not considered mechuber la'aretz, and the Torah says you're only chayav in Maasros if you have something that grows directly from the ground. However, according to the Chacham, we hold that a sfina that's floating on top of the water is considered mechuber lekarka, and we don't see the water as a hefsek, it's all one hemshech. So too in the case of an otzitz, which is suspended in the air al gabi yisedos, it's considered mechuber lekarka, and the pears that grow in that otzitz are chayav in Trumas and Maasros. Omar Rava Dilmaloi. Rava says, I don't accept your analogy. Ad kan lo kama Rabbi Yehuda asam. When does Rabbi Yehuda hold that mayim is a hefsek, and therefore the sfina on top of the water is considered eino mechuber lekarka, and it doesn't have the status of Eretz Yisrael? And here we turn to the Ches. That's a sfina, which is asuya levrach. It's always in motion. It never stays in one place. And therefore, if it's not attached to the ground in low, shallow water, then it has no connection to the ground itself. It's moving from one place to the other. It's never stationary and connected to one particular place on the ground. It's not considered mechuber lekarka. But an otzitz is stationary. No one's moving it, and it's in one place, and it nourishes because it's nakuv from the ground. So the nourishment and the nutrients that it needs to grow are sucked up through the avir, and therefore it's called mechubal karka. Lo, Rav Yehuda would say that, you know what? That's considered mechubal karka. Why? Because there's a stationary, permanent relationship between the otzitz and that which grows in the otzitz and the karka below. Inami, I could differentiate even according to the shita of the Chachamim. Ad kalu kami rabbanon hasam el b'sfina d'lo mafsik avira. When did the rabbanon say that a sfina is considered mechubal karka and it has a din therefore of Eretz Yisrael? That's because there's no airspace that separates between the sfina and the karka below. Right, the karka and the water, all the way up to the sfina, are one continuum. The maya ki aras michtadami. The status of the water is like it's part of the karka. It's an extension of the karka. The sfina is considered mechubal karka. Aval otz, it's the mafsik avira. Here's where the Chachamim would agree that the avir is mafsik between the otzitz and the karka below, and it's not considered mechubal karka. Even the Chacham would agree that in this case of an otzitz, it's not mechubal karka. Okay, then this is where we'll stop for today. That's Hashem. And I wanted to talk to you about Thursday. Thursday is Erev Yom Tov. And I'm wondering if we could possibly learn earlier than usual. Maybe even as early as 7 o'clock. I don't know. You let me know. Think it over if it's
definitely 7 or 7:30. That would work very well.
Okay then. All right. So Bli Neder, Thursday at 7. We'll confirm it. Okay, but tomorrow it's regular 7:30. All right. Have a great
deal.